This is my true story. I worked every day of my life to give my daughter the world I never had. I saved every coin, every note, every breath, for her. I paid her school fees, her dresses, her wedding. I thought love was enough to keep a family pure. I believed that the one I raised with care would never betray the hands that built her life. But one afternoon, a stranger came to my door and showed me a photo that broke my soul in half. Before I tell you what I really saw, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe right now. From the moment she was born, my life changed. Everything I did for her. The long nights, the double shifts, the sleepless mornings, they all had her name written on them. When she cried, I ran. When she smiled, I forgot pain. I built her world out of my own hunger. I skipped meals so she could eat. I walked miles so she could ride. Every dream I once had for myself became hers instead. I wasn't rich, but I worked like I was. Because a father's love doesn't count the cost, it just gives until there's nothing left. When she was small, she would run into my arms and call me her hero. I carried her on my shoulders through crowded markets, letting her see the world from a place of safety. I remember her tiny hands clutching my collar as if I was her whole sky. She was my reason to keep breathing when everything else felt heavy. There were nights when I came home soaked from rain, too tired to stand, but the sound of her laugh could lift me back to life. That was my wealth, her laughter, her joy. I worked in factories, in fields, in places that broke men faster than they built them. My hands grew hard, my back bent low, but my heart stayed proud. Every paycheck went straight into her future. I saved in small envelopes, hiding them under the mattress, marking each one for her. I told myself one day she would use it for something beautiful, a home, a dream, a life better than mine. I didn't know that the same money would one day buy my heartbreak. She grew up fast, too fast. The little girl who used to braid my hair now barely had time to talk. She started wearing the clothes I couldn't pronounce the names of. She started talking about cities I'd never seen. Still, I trusted her. I thought change was just part of growing up. I told myself she was busy building her life, not forgetting mine. A father always believes in the softer version of truth, the one that hurts less. When she got her first job, I was the proudest man alive. I bought sweets for the neighbors, telling everyone, "My daughter has made it." Every word felt like a victory over the life I came from. I told her to save her money, to plan for the future. She smiled, nodded, and said, "Don't worry, Dad. I'll take care of everything." And I believed her. Because trust is easy when love blinds you. Then came the talk of marriage. She told me about a man she loved, a man who made her happy. I wanted to meet him, but she said he lived far away, that his job kept him busy. I didn't push. I thought love didn't need to be questioned. She asked me to help with the wedding, said it would be simple. I opened my savings and told her to take what she needed. She kissed my hand and said, "You're the best father in the world." I spent weeks preparing, counting notes, signing papers, making sure every detail was perfect. The bank teller smiled when I withdrew almost everything I had. "Big occasion?" he asked. I nodded proudly and said, "My daughter's wedding." He congratulated me, not knowing that the same money would one day buy the photo that shattered me. The day she left for her new life, I stood at the gate waving goodbye, tears in my eyes, pride in my chest. She didn't look back. I told myself she was just excited. I told myself she'd call once she settled. Days passed, then weeks. The calls became shorter, colder. But still, I never doubted her. I thought silence was just distance. I didn't know silence was the start of betrayal. I kept living as if everything was fine. I cooked for one, spoke to no one, waited for her visits that never came. I told everyone my daughter was busy, that she was happy. I lied because the truth would have broken me, that love, no matter how deep, cannot protect you from deceit. And so, I worked and saved for her life, and without knowing it, I was also saving for my own heartbreak. A heartbreak that would arrive quietly, in the hands of a stranger, holding a phone that carried the end of everything I believed in. It began with small things, soft words, gentle smiles, promises that sounded like love but felt like distance. My daughter would call every few days, her voice bright, full of plans and excitement. She said the wedding was coming together perfectly, the venue booked, the dress chosen, the guests confirmed. Every time she spoke, she added one more thing that needed money. "Just a little more, Dad," she would say, laughing softly. And every time I gave it. Not because I had plenty, but because I wanted her to never feel lack. A father's heart doesn't ask questions, it only opens wider. She told me her husband was busy, always traveling for work, but they were happy. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. She sent photos sometimes, smiling, glowing, everything in place. In each picture, she wore something I had bought, the earrings, the bracelet, the dress. She said, "See, Dad? Everything you gave me is bringing me luck." I smiled at the pictures and told myself I had done well. I didn't see the truth hiding in plain sight, that the luck she was talking about wasn't mine, or even hers. It belonged to someone else entirely. The calls became shorter over time. Sometimes days would pass before I heard from her. I didn't complain. I told myself she had her own life now, her own home, her own worries. But still, I kept sending money. For the new house, for furniture, for travel, for emergencies. Each withdrawal was like giving away a piece of myself. The woman at the bank began to recognize me. She'd say, "Helping your daughter again, sir?" And I'd nod with pride, not realizing how deep the lie was digging. One day, she came to visit after months. She looked beautiful, well-dressed, polished, glowing. She brought gifts, spoke sweetly, laughed easily. For a moment, it felt like the little girl I raised was back. She hugged me tight, and I felt that warmth again, the kind only a parent knows. Then she told me she needed one last amount, something big, for a final payment before the wedding papers were done. She said it would be the last time, that after this, she would take care of me for the rest of my life. Her words wrapped around me like comfort, and I believed everyone. I took out the last of my savings, everything I had worked decades for, my retirement, my emergency funds, even the little money I kept for medicine. I told her, "This is all I have left." She smiled, held my hand and said, "You've given me everything, Dad. I'll make you proud." I remember her eyes, calm, steady, unreadable. Love makes blindness look like trust. When she left that day, I stood at the door watching her car disappear. I felt light, empty, yes, but proud. I thought I had done my duty. I thought my years of sacrifice had reached their purpose. I made tea that night and sat by the window, whispering to myself, "She's happy now. That's all that matters." I didn't know that happiness was built on lies, and that the truth was already on its way to my doorstep. Weeks passed, and something felt off. Her calls stopped, her messages came late. When I did hear from her, her voice was hurried, distracted. Once, I heard laughter in the background, a man's voice, one I didn't recognize. She said it was just a friend helping with wedding work. I smiled and believed it. Because love always chooses the easier lie over the harder truth. The perfect lie doesn't sound like betrayal. It sounds like care. It looks like devotion. It hides behind the language of love. My daughter knew that. She spoke like the girl I raised, but she had become someone else entirely. I didn't see the truth coming, not through arguments, not through suspicion, but through a stranger's knock on a quiet afternoon. A knock that would strip every illusion away and turn every coin I gave her into the sound of my breaking heart. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind that feels quiet, harmless, and slow. The sky was gray, and I was sitting near the window, counting my medicine tablets for the week. The house felt heavier than usual. No calls, no messages, only silence and the steady ticking of the old clock on the wall. I had grown used to that silence, convincing myself it was peace. But that day, peace had a sound, 3 knocks on the door that would change everything I believed about my daughter. I wasn't expecting anyone. Hardly anyone visited me anymore. The neighbors waved sometimes, but most of them had their own lives to worry about. The knocking came again, firmer this time. I got up slowly, my knees stiff, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for the door handle. When I opened it, a man stood there, maybe in his 30s, dressed neatly but with eyes that looked unsure. He held a phone in his hand and a nervous look on his face. "Sir," he said softly, "I'm sorry to bother you, but are you her father?" He said my daughter's name. Hearing it from a stranger's mouth made my stomach tighten. I nodded slowly, confused. He hesitated for a second, glancing down at his phone as if deciding whether to continue. Then he sighed and said, "You need to see something." I didn't understand at first. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe a photo from a wedding, or an event I wasn't invited to. But the tone in his voice wasn't casual. It carried the weight of truth, the kind people don't want to deliver. He turned the screen toward me. What I saw next made my chest go cold. It was a photo, bright, clear, cruel. My daughter was in it, sitting close to a man I had never seen before. They were laughing, holding drinks, her hand resting easily on his shoulder. She wore a dress I recognized instantly, one I had bought for her as part of her wedding set. The same fabric I had worked overtime to pay for. Around them, stacks of cash sat on the table. My money, my life's work. I looked closer and saw the bank envelope I had written her name on, the one I had used to give her the last of my savings. My throat dried. My hands began to shake, not from age, but from the sudden collapse of everything I believed in. I blinked, hoping it was a mistake, that my mind was seeing wrong, but it wasn't. The date on the corner of the screen was from 2 days ago. "She's been meeting him often," the man said quietly, breaking the silence that felt like it was crushing the air around me. "I thought you should know. He's not her husband." His voice carried hesitation, maybe guilt. He said he worked at the place they visited often, that he had seen her several times but didn't want to interfere, until he realized who she was lying to. He showed me more pictures, dinners, hotels, shopping bags, each one sharper than the last, each one cutting deeper. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the doorframe, my heart pounding but hollow. The man stepped back, looking at me with pity. "I'm sorry, sir," he said softly. "You seem like a good man. You deserve to know." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, still staring at the screen long after he was gone. The door stayed open behind me, but I didn't move. My eyes were fixed on the photo, my mind refusing to accept what it saw. I had seen lies before, from strangers, from life, but never from her. Never from the one I raised with my hands, the one I trusted with everything. The world felt smaller in that moment, the air colder, the colors around me drained away. I sank into the nearest chair, my fingers clutching the phone like it might burn through my skin. The screen dimmed, but the image stayed burned in my mind. I don't remember how long I sat there, maybe an hour, maybe all afternoon. The clock kept ticking, the light outside faded, but inside me, something stopped, something that had been alive for decades. Faith, trust, love. Whatever name it had, it froze right there in my chest, and it never melted again. When the door finally closed behind the stranger, I stood there for a long time, staring at the floor. The silence in the house had changed. It wasn't the quiet of peace anymore. It was the quiet of something dying. I moved slowly to the chair by the table and placed the phone down in front of me. The screen had gone dark, but I could still see the image in my mind, clear, cruel, permanent. I picked it up again, my hands trembling, and turned the screen back on. The photo was still there. She was smiling in it, wide, alive, free, the kind of smile she used to give me when she was little, back when her happiness came from simple things. But this time, that smile wasn't mine. It was his. Her hand on his shoulder, her eyes bright, her posture relaxed. Around them, I saw everything I had given her, the purse, the bracelet, even the phone she was holding in the picture, all bought with the money I had worked years to save. My eyes fell to the table in front of them. There it was, my handwriting on an envelope half torn open, the one I had labeled, "For her future." And there was money. So much money. My money. The same money that had once meant safety, medicine, home. Now it lay spread like decoration in front of strangers laughing over it. I felt my chest tighten. The air in the room grew thick, pressing against my ribs. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Every detail in that image was a blade cutting deeper. I swiped through the photos. There were more. Her at restaurants. Her in hotels. Her holding hands with the same man. Her drinking, dancing, posing. All the while wearing things I had paid for, smiling with the ease of someone who had forgotten where she came from. Each picture stole a year from me. Each one felt heavier than the last. When I reached the last photo, I stopped. It was taken in daylight, on a street I recognized. She was holding a bag, laughing again. And behind her, the car I had helped her buy. It was the proof of everything I refused to believe. That love, when placed in the wrong heart, turns into greed. I sat there, still, my hands gripping the phone until my knuckles went white. The rain started outside, soft at first, then harder, hitting the window with rhythm. I watched the drops slide down the glass. It reminded me of the years I worked in the rain, the years I thought had meaning. Every drop that hit the glass felt like a small echo of my own foolishness. How could she? How could the same child who once wrapped her arms around me in fear, who cried when I was sick, who promised to take care of me one day, become this? My body went numb. My thoughts stopped making sense. I wasn't angry. Anger needs strength, and I didn't have any left. What I felt was deeper, a silence inside the heart, a cold that spreads until nothing feels alive anymore. The room grew darker. I didn't turn the lights on. I just sat there, the phone in my hand, my life flashing in front of me like a story I no longer recognized. The photo on the screen was no longer an image. It was proof that everything I believed in was a lie. Hours passed before I finally put the phone down. My tea on the table had gone cold. I stared at it for a while, then whispered something to myself. I don't even remember what. Maybe it was her name. Maybe it was a prayer. Maybe it was both. The rain outside turned into a storm. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance, deep and hollow. I looked up at the ceiling and closed my eyes. I felt old that night. Older than I ever had before. It wasn't my body. It was my soul. Something inside me had frozen, and I knew it would never thaw again. That was the night I stopped being a father. The night a single photo turned love into ice. The night after I saw that photo was the longest night of my life. It began with silence and ended with silence, but everything in between felt like a storm. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark, watching the shadows crawl across the walls I had painted for her years ago. Every corner of that house carried her laughter, her voice, her scent, and now every inch of it felt like betrayal. The walls that once held pride now echoed with lies. I looked around the room and saw pieces of her everywhere. The photo frame on the shelf, the clothes I bought for her hanging by the door, the blanket she used as a child folded neatly on the chair. Each thing that used to warm me now made me sick. It was as if the house itself had become a stranger, filled with ghosts of a daughter who no longer existed. I tried to think, but my thoughts moved in circles. I remembered her as a little girl, running barefoot across the floor, calling my name when she scraped her knee. I remembered holding her hand at her first school, telling her to always be kind, always be honest. I remembered her promise, "I'll never hurt you, Dad." That promise now felt like a cruel joke written in invisible ink. At some point, I heard her footsteps outside. The sound pulled me from my thoughts. The door opened quietly. She came in, humming to herself, her perfume filling the air. She didn't see me at first, sitting there in the dark, watching. When she finally did, she smiled like nothing had happened. "Dad, you're still awake?" she said lightly, setting her bag down. Her voice was calm, her face glowing. She had no idea what I knew. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my tongue felt heavy. I looked at her and wondered how easily a person could wear two faces, one for the world, one for the ones who loved them. She walked past me, checked her phone, laughed softly at a message, and went straight to her room. The door closed, the light went out, just like that. No guilt, no hesitation. I sat there for hours after that, staring at the crack of light beneath her door. My body was still, but inside, everything was breaking. I wanted to knock. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to tell her what I saw. But the words never came. There's a kind of pain that language can't touch. Some wounds can't be spoken. They just sit inside you like glass, cutting you every time you breathe. At midnight, the house fell completely silent. Only the sound of rain against the window remained. I leaned back in my chair, my hands covering my face. Tears came without warning, slow at first, then heavy, unstoppable. They weren't loud. They weren't angry. They were tired. The kind of tears that come when a man realizes the person he would have died for would never have done the same. I cried for the years I gave, for the nights I worked through storms, for the food I skipped so she could eat, for the dreams I buried so hers could live. I cried for every word I believed, every lie I didn't see. And when the tears finally stopped, I felt hollow, like a house with no walls left standing. When I finally stood up, dawn was near. The light through the window was gray and cold. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. My eyes were red, my face pale, my shoulders sunken. I didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked like someone who had been emptied out. She came out of her room around that time, still half asleep, still beautiful in the way youth always is. She smiled, kissed my cheek and said, "Dad, you worry too much." Then she poured herself tea and left the house. The same hands that once wiped her tears now hung useless at my sides. I watched her walk away, her steps light, her heart unbothered. That morning, I realized something cruel but clear. Love, when one-sided, doesn't heal. It destroys. I had spent my life giving her everything I had, and in return, she had given me a silence colder than any grave. The night ended, but the pain didn't. It stayed. It settled. It became part of me. That was the night I learned that sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the laughter of someone you once called your world. The morning after that sleepless night, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, not anymore. Anger burns fast, but what I felt was colder, steadier. The kind of silence that comes after a storm has broken everything in its path. I sat at the table where I had cried the night before, the same chair where I used to wait for her to come home. The tea beside me had gone cold, untouched. I looked around the room, and for the first time, I didn't see memories. I saw evidence, reminders of every lie, every stolen moment, every piece of my life that had been turned into her stage for deceit. She came home that afternoon like nothing was wrong. She hummed a song while unpacking groceries, smiled, and asked if I wanted soup. I nodded, but my mind wasn't there anymore. I watched her move around the kitchen, calm, carefree, graceful, and realized that her peace had been built on my blindness. I thought about the man in the photo, the stacks of money, the dress I bought with hands that had known nothing but work. The image stayed behind my eyes like a ghost. Every time she smiled, I saw it again. That evening, I went to my small drawer, the one where I kept all my important papers. It held my bank documents, receipts, and the folders with her name printed neatly on top. Years ago, when she started her wedding plans, she had insisted on adding me as a joint holder to her account. "In case something happens to me, Dad," she had said sweetly. I had smiled, touched by her thoughtfulness. I didn't know that one day that small signature, her careless decision, would become my lifeline. I pulled out every paper, laid them on the table, and started reading. The numbers, the transfers, the statements, they told stories more honest than her lips ever did. She had moved money often, always under reasons I never questioned. Furniture, travel, expenses. Each note of withdrawal was a confession she didn't mean to write. I saw her name beside mine on every page, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Not with joy, with certainty. There's a strange strength that comes when a man realizes he's done being a victim. I wasn't going to scream or beg for an apology. I wasn't going to curse her or destroy her life in rage. Number. I was going to do something quieter, something clean, deliberate, and fair. I was going to take back what was mine. I spent that night making notes, small details, account numbers, signatures, dates. I wrote them down carefully, with the same precision I used when I taught her to write her first words. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same education I worked for was now about to undo her lies. The same hand that once fed her was now going to feed justice. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. I just sat there with the papers spread out before me, the lamp casting a dull yellow light on the surface. My eyes followed the ink, tracing every line like a path back to the truth. And somewhere between those pages, I found peace again. Not the soft, forgiving peace I used to dream of, but the cold, unshakable peace of a man who has nothing left to lose. By morning, my mind was clear. The decision was made. I didn't need help. I didn't need advice. I only needed one phone call. The same kind of call that ends lies without raising a voice. The world had taken too much from me already. My love had been turned into currency, my trust into mockery. I wasn't going to let it end that way. As the sun came up, I folded the papers neatly, placed them back in the envelope, and whispered a small sentence under my breath, not out of hatred, but out of resolve. It's my turn now. Then I poured myself a cup of tea, calm and steady, and waited for the bank to open. That was the morning I stopped being the man who gave everything. That was the morning I became the man who would take it all back, quietly, legally, and finally. The morning light crept slowly across the floor as I sat by the table, the papers neatly stacked in front of me. My hands didn't tremble anymore. My breath was steady, and for the first time in years, my thoughts were sharp. It was strange. After a lifetime of pain and confusion, I finally knew exactly what to do. There was no anger left, no noise in my head, only a quiet kind of focus, cold and clear. The phone sat by the corner of the table, the same phone I once used to call her every night when she moved out. This time, it would not be for love. It would be for truth. I dialed the bank's number from the papers she had left behind. It was the same bank I had trusted for decades, the one that held everything I ever earned. The call connected after a few rings, and a calm voice answered, asking for my name and details. I gave them slowly, clearly. They confirmed the account, the joint ownership, the balances. Every word they spoke was a reminder of how much of my life I had poured into her name. When the manager came on the line, I didn't rush. I spoke the way I used to when I worked, steady, polite, firm. I explained everything. I told him how the account had been created, how my savings had been moved, and how the money had been used. I mentioned the receipts, the statements, the transfers to names that didn't belong. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't shout. It just stands quietly until it's seen. The manager was silent for a long moment. Then he said softly, "Sir, do you have any proof of these claims?" I smiled faintly, a tired, sad kind of smile, and said, "I have everything." I read him the details, the dates, the numbers, the transfers. I could hear him typing, checking, pausing. When he finally spoke again, his tone had changed. It wasn't formal anymore. It was careful. "Sir," he said, "I can confirm discrepancies. These are serious." I told him I wanted the account frozen immediately. He hesitated, just for a second, then said, "You're authorized, mister. As a joint holder, we can initiate a hold while we review." His words were calm, procedural, but to me, they sounded like justice being written in real time. I gave him my approval, thanked him, and ended the call. The moment the line went silent, I sat back and exhaled. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. The house felt different, lighter, but not in a happy way. It was the kind of lightness that comes after something heavy has finally been lifted off your chest. I looked around the room and saw nothing but quiet. The rain outside had stopped. Even the air felt still, as if the world itself was waiting for what would happen next. I knew what freezing her account meant. It wasn't about the money alone, though it was mine, every last coin of it. It was about balance. For years, she had lived like my sacrifices were invisible. She had built her comfort on my blindness. And now, with one calm phone call, I had undone all of it. I imagined her waking up, going about her day, not knowing yet that the world she lived in was already collapsing. I pictured her reaching for her card at a cafe, smiling at the cashier, then seeing the message flash across her phone, "Transaction declined." I imagined the confusion in her eyes, the disbelief, the sudden fear. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because that was the moment truth would finally reach her. I sat in that chair for hours after the call, sipping tea, watching the clock tick. Every sound in the room, the clock, the wind, even the faint rustle of the curtains, felt sharper, louder. Justice has a strange silence before it lands, like the pause before thunder. That one call didn't just freeze an account, it froze a pattern. It stopped the cycle of giving without return, of trust without respect. It was the quiet strike of a man who had been silent too long. When the sun began to set that evening, I looked out the window and whispered to myself, "It's done." No anger, no regret. Just a strange peace. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a man who had finally taken back what was his. The next morning arrived quietly. No thunder, no storm, just a gray stillness that hung over the street like a secret waiting to be told. I woke early, not because I had to, but because old habits die hard. Years of rising before dawn for work had built that rhythm into my bones. But this morning was different. There was no rush, no plan, no burden left to carry. I made tea, poured it slowly, and sat by the window, watching the pale sky turn lighter. The world outside seemed ordinary, but I knew something extraordinary was already happening. Somewhere across town, my daughter was waking up to a truth she could no longer escape. I pictured it in my mind, her hand reaching for her phone, her sleepy eyes blinking at the screen, and then the confusion. The first alert from the bank. Transaction failed. Then another. And another. She'd probably think it was a glitch. She would try again, at the store, at the cafe, online. Each time the same message would appear. Her smile would fade a little more with each failure. That same smile that once fooled me into giving her everything. By the time her phone started ringing with calls from her boyfriend, panic would have started setting in. She would hear him asking for the money, demanding to know why it wasn't coming. I could almost hear her voice, soft at first, then nervous, then trembling. She'd check her balance again and again, scrolling through numbers that didn't make sense anymore. What she didn't know was that every line, every transaction, every shadow of her lies was now frozen in place, waiting for her to face it. I took a sip of tea and looked out at the small garden I had planted years ago. The morning dew glistened on the leaves, small drops catching the faint sunlight. I hadn't really noticed it in a long time. I used to be too busy worrying about her bills, her rent, her happiness. Now, for the first time in years, I had nothing to worry about. I felt a strange calm in my chest, not joy, not pride, something quieter. Peace with an edge of sadness. Around noon, the phone began to ring. I didn't have to check to know who it was. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then silence. A few minutes later, it rang again, this time longer. I picked it up but didn't speak. All I could hear was her voice on the other side, panicked, sharp, pleading. She said my name again and again, her tone cracking. She didn't know I was listening. I waited until her words turned to sobs. Then I ended the call. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. For years I had answered every call, every request, every tear. I had said yes when I should have said no. I had carried her mistakes like my own. But not this time. This time, the silence was my answer. Later that afternoon, I heard a knock on the door. I didn't move right away. The knocking grew harder, desperate. Through the window, I saw her standing there, hair messy, face pale, phone still in her hand. She looked smaller somehow, weaker. The pride she once wore like armor was gone. Her lips moved fast, saying words I couldn't hear through the glass. I stayed still. The knock turned into banging. Then it stopped. She sank to her knees, her head against the door, crying. I watched her in silence, the same silence she once gave me when I begged for her attention. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I didn't open the door. Eventually, she stood up, wiped her face, and walked away. Her figure disappeared down the street, swallowed by the light of day. I kept looking until she was gone. When the house grew quiet again, I sat back in my chair and stared at the empty cup beside me. The tea had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I thought of all the nights I had stayed awake worrying about her, wondering if she ate, if she was safe, if she was happy. And now, for the first time, I realized that love doesn't mean saving someone who keeps burning you. Sometimes love means stepping back and letting them feel the fire they started. The morning ended, but something in me had begun. The old man who once bent under guilt and pain was gone. What remained was still, steady, unbroken. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her love. I had something better. Peace built from truth. That was the morning my heart finally stopped chasing what never cared to stay. The next sunrise came softer than I expected. The world outside was calm, the air heavy with mist, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not happy, not sad. Just free. The kind of freedom that comes when there's nothing left to lose and nothing left to wait for. I stood by the window, watching the faint line of sunlight touch the roofs across the street. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a long battle. I knew then that it was time to go. Not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because I had done everything I needed to do. My story with her had ended. I packed slowly. Not much. Just a few shirts, my old watch, and the papers that still mattered. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching the walls, the furniture, the marks on the doorframe that showed her height as she grew up. Every mark had a story. Every story had love in it. But that love had turned cold now, and the house felt like a museum of memories I no longer belonged to. On the table lay the photo frame of her graduation, her smile wide, her eyes bright, my hand on her shoulder. I picked it up for a moment, stared at it, and placed it face down. It didn't hurt anymore. It just felt distant, like looking at a stranger who used to live in my world. I folded the last of my clothes, zipped the small bag, and took one last look at the house. It was still, clean, empty. The kind of silence that only comes after a storm has passed. Before leaving, I wrote a short note and placed it on the table. Just one line. No anger, no goodbye. Only truth. Don't look for me. The money I took was mine all along. Then I locked the door behind me and walked away. The morning air was cool against my face. The road ahead looked endless, but for the first time, I didn't feel tired. Every step away from that house felt like a step toward myself. I reached the bus stop and waited, watching people rush past, strangers with their own lives, their own heartbreaks. No one knew me. No one knew what I had done. And that was exactly how I wanted it. My life had been built around others, their needs, their wants, their dreams. This time, it was about peace, not purpose. When the bus arrived, I got on quietly and sat by the window. The city moved past, streets I had known for decades, shops I had walked by 1,000 times. But it all looked different now, smaller, like a world I had finally outgrown. My reflection in the glass looked calm, older, but alive. I realized I hadn't felt that in years. Alive. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't even decide until the bus started moving. Somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would think to look. I still had enough money. The same money she thought was hers. The same money that built her comfort. It was mine again now, and I wasn't going to waste it on revenge or pride. I was going to buy peace. A small home by the sea maybe, or a quiet town where no one asked questions. As the city disappeared behind me, I thought of her one last time. She'd wake up soon, search the house, find the note, and realize it was over. The bank would confirm the transfers, the calls would stop, and the silence would begin. She would cry maybe, she would rage, but in time, she'd understand. Not what I did, but why I did it. Some lessons don't come from shouting, they come from absence. The road stretched on endlessly, fields of yellow and green flashing by. I leaned my head against the window and closed my eyes. I felt the rhythm of the bus, steady and slow, like a heartbeat, one that finally beat for me. For once, there was no weight on my chest, no fear of what tomorrow would bring. Just peace, simple, quiet, earned. By the time the bus crossed the bridge out of the city, I knew I'd never return. The man who once waited for love had vanished with the sunrise. What remained was someone new. Someone who had learned that sometimes the only way to live again is to walk away completely. And so I did. Days turned into weeks, and the world moved on without me. Quietly, effortlessly, like I was never there. I found a small town by the sea, far from the noise, far from the faces that used to remind me of what I lost. The air smelled of salt and wind, and the sound of the waves was the only clock I needed. I rented a small room above an old cafe. It had a single window that faced the horizon, a bed that creaked when I turned, and enough silence to rebuild what was left of me. Each morning, I woke before the sun and watched it rise, slow and golden, touching the water with light. I would sit with my cup of tea and think of nothing. Not her, not the past, not the years I wasted. My heart had finally grown quiet. The pain that once lived like a storm inside me had settled into something softer. Memory. It didn't sting anymore. It simply existed. Sometimes people in the cafe downstairs would talk about their families, their children, their parents, their little fights, their laughter. I listened, not with envy, but with understanding. They didn't know how fragile love could be until it broke. They didn't know how quickly warmth could turn to frost. I used to be like them, thinking family was unbreakable, that love would always protect me. I learned the hard way that even the most sacred bond can crack when greed and pride take root. There were nights when I couldn't sleep. I would walk to the shore and stand barefoot in the cold sand, feeling the sea breeze against my face. The moon would hang low, its reflection trembling in the water, and I would remember her, the little girl with braids, running to me with open arms, calling me Dad. I would see her as she was then, not the woman who lied, not the one who used my kindness, but the child I once carried on my shoulders. And for a moment, I would forgive her, not because she asked for it, but because I needed to breathe again. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean letting them back in. It just means setting yourself free from the chains of what they did. I forgave her, but I never went back. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. The money I took, my money, I kept safely. Not to spend recklessly, not to prove anything, but to remind myself that what I built still had value. Every coin was a piece of my labor, every dollar a story of rain, sweat, and years of silence. For the first time, I used it for me. Good food, warm clothes, a roof that didn't leak. Simple things. Things I had once denied myself so she could live better. People in the town called me the quiet man. They didn't know my name or my story, and I preferred it that way. I wasn't running from the past anymore. I was just done living inside it. I found peace not in what I gained, but in what I let go. The need to be loved by those who didn't deserve it. Sometimes when I walked through the market, I saw fathers and daughters together, laughing, arguing, buying vegetables. It made me smile, not with bitterness, but with a kind of acceptance. Life is a circle. Some bonds stay pure, others fall apart. I happened to live through the latter, but I survived it. That was enough. One evening, I wrote something down in a small notebook, not for her, not for anyone else to read, just for me. I gave her life, love, and everything I had. She gave me loss, but in that loss, I found myself again. As the sun disappeared beneath the horizon, I sat by the window and watched the last light fade. The sea was calm, the sky painted in gold and gray. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. She used my money for her secret love. I used my silence to end hers. And in the end, it wasn't revenge that saved me. It was peace. That was the final truth of my story. I didn't win. I simply stopped losing. And sometimes that's the most powerful ending a man can have.